Okay, well, hello and welcome to the Blockchain Journal Club. I'm Carlos.
And I'm Perry.
Hello, Perry. How's it going?
Good, you, Carlos?
Good. How was your Thanksgiving?
Pretty good, pretty good.
Canadian Thanksgiving.
Absolutely.
But we have someone here who knows about the real Thanksgiving. Patrick, welcome. Patrick Joyce. So today we have a guest. We have Patrick Joyce, and we're going to talk about some cool things that he's been involved in. I'm going to let him introduce himself. You're joining us from Massachusetts, right? Massachusetts?
I'm actually outside of
Maryland.
Pretty much.
Washington, D.C. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, they're all kind of the same to me, honestly.
That's
like the northwest, no, northeast.
Yeah.
I think. Yeah. Okay, Patrick. So yeah, please, if you can introduce yourself and we can get started.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Patrick Joyce. I'm the Chief Scientific Officer of Research Hub, which is a startup where the idea is to use a Reddit-style forum and reward people in a cryptocurrency in order to encourage open contribution to the scientific community. So basically, we're trying to break down barriers to participation, make it easier to get funding for your projects, and then have all of science be done out in the open, where anyone can learn from and contribute to it. My background is I'm a medical student at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. After college, I started a PhD program in molecular biology and biochemistry. I did the first 2 years, and it was apparent to me that there were some issues within the infrastructure for academic science that we'll talk about a little later in this episode. And I wanted to do something to help fix them. So I started a company where the idea was to crowdsource scientific research. And I ended up joining forces with a couple of people who have some experience building these types of companies. And today we have a product on the Ethereum mainnet called Research Hub, where you can go share PDFs of papers, add your criticism, and then curate using Reddit style upvotes and downvotes. We have a couple plans for the future, but that's kind of like that 10,000 foot view. It's great to be here. Thank you, guys.
No, thanks for joining us.
Very nice intro.
Thank you. Practice.
All right, so I guess should we get right into like maybe you said that you noticed some things during your sort of foray into academia that you found weren't so great, and probably is a good segue to get into like why Research Hub and how it works. So what was that specifically?
Yeah, so I think there are a whole bunch of things. Some have to do with money, some don't. The first idea that I had while I was in my PhD program was during the time that we were rotating through labs, basically like speed dating which labs we wanted to join for the 5 to 7 year PhD program. I would go into a lab and I would spend the first like 2 weeks or so of the 6-week rotation just learning what happened in that lab, not reading the papers per se, but like what each student was actively doing in their projects, what type of experiments they like to run, just like the day-to-day operations of the lab. And to me, like, although the experience was great meeting people, it seemed really inefficient that there wasn't some kind of like Wikipedia style summary for the lab where new students could come in, see the data that was being produced, see the basically lines of research of all the students within the laboratory, and show up on day one with all of the background information already understood in order to get into the nitty gritty right away. And so I thought that this concept could probably be scaled across all of the laboratories in the world. And it would be an amazing way to have a better insight into what everybody's doing at any given time.
Okay, so that got you started into thinking about this stuff.
Yeah, pretty much. It just didn't make sense to me why there were awesome tools like Twitter and Reddit where people can go and share information and learn from each other's own experiences. And academia seemed pretty far behind on just the like infrastructure of communicating within itself.
And also, I mean, I think an interesting thing in academia is that there's like a pretty strong component of competition, right? And especially in like life sciences fields, I know people are like extremely secretive with what they're doing. So I wonder like if that played a part in that, and if some fields are more amenable to that than others. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Oh, so many thoughts. So I think like to drill down to this, like, why do you think that happens? Like, it's weird because everybody does have to keep their data and their ideas like close to the chest for fear of being scooped. But what's the genesis of this like overly competitive marketplace for an academic position?
I mean, I guess competition can lead to good things, right? In a sense, it'll push people, to work harder than they would, I would imagine. But it can definitely become unproductive. But I think in life sciences, there's a very high overhead to producing a result. And if it turns out that somebody had the same idea and put it out right before you, you just waste so much like money, right? So I guess maybe, yeah, I don't know if I think we had mentioned earlier this system of like pre-announcing what you're going to be working on and sort of reserving it might be a good alternative. Definitely, an interesting thing to discuss, I guess.
Yeah, so I think part of the reason has to do with just the general lack of resources for academic scientists. So I don't know if it's the same in Canada, but I know in the US and the UK, it's something like 1% of first year PhD students end up having academic professorships where they're able to do research. So that's not even professors fighting for grants. That's just PhD students trying to get to the point that they could fight for a grant. And that to me seems overly competitive to the point where it's past bringing the best out of us and more so encouraging us to um, conduct ourselves in ways that aren't necessarily beneficial for the community as a whole. So I see this kind of protective nature of information as being a result of really needing that next grant bad in order to keep your career going and not wanting to take any risk when it comes to potentially not getting that grant. So I think if we were able to distribute resources more effectively in a way that there could be more jobs out there, I think that researchers would be more, I guess, inclined to share and collaborate. But just the job market currently, I think it's so scarce. It's hard to trust anyone for fear that they'll come eat your dinner. So I think it's about figuring out a way to distribute resources more effectively, where we can take away that, oh, my entire career is over if I don't get my next grant type feeling that a lot of researchers have.
I think it even starts in undergrad, right, where you're fighting for these like scholarships or these like summer research positions. The competition is there from like a very early, like you're aware of the competition from a very early period. I don't know. It's like, yeah, the competition is sort of fostered throughout the whole process.
I also kind of see like big industry players maybe like adding to that, or maybe putting some pressure on that system, because now there's a lot of this like brain drain happening where Google and Facebook just hires a bunch of professors and gives them a ton of money to just have fun with with it. So yeah, it definitely seems like there needs to be something a bit more appealing to being in academia than there is now.
Yeah, isn't that so amazing? Just the way you described that too. Like, gives smart people a ton of money to have fun doing science because they know the outcome is going to make them a lot of money. And I think that having more of that startup type perspective towards knowledge creation would be beneficial for like the big government agencies that distribute these billions of dollars to researchers. To get to your point though about the pre-registrations, one thing we've been exploring, and I'm personally a huge fan of, is the concept of pre-registration. And the idea here is before you actually conduct a study, you share the goals of the study, the hypothesis, the variables which you're going to analyze, how you plan to collect data, how you plan to analyze that data, and you put this out in the public domain. So when you do collect the data and you do publish your findings on that information, you have already described what you are going to do. This prevents like publication biases. So if you have negative results, you have to share it because you already told everybody that you were going to do the study. It prevents like narrative biases within analyses. So if you have a data set, it prevents you from using a different statistical analysis technique in order to find that p-value that you want. Uh, because you've already described what you're going to do to analyze the data beforehand. So this is really powerful in just eliminating a lot of the, I think, research misconduct that happens in the world. And what we want to do is essentially help fund projects based on these pre-registrations. So rather than being a PI who has to go write like a 50-page grant application, which takes 5 to 12 months, and then you receive your funding, you could just do like a 60-minute long 8-question questionnaire describing your study, share it publicly, and then let anyone in the world who's interested in funding that research chip in. And the idea is to, in general, our idea with Research Hub is to use financial incentives to help encourage healthier research behaviors. One of these is pre-registrations.
That's interesting, and I guess the way you describe pre-registration sounded like it lends itself well to being implemented on blockchain, right? I mean, you really want some sense of finality and immutability to these, I guess, descriptions of what you want to do, right? Is that something you're thinking about?
Yeah, absolutely. And then I think the other value prop, because to some researchers it can be kind of scary, right? Like you are describing exactly how you're going to spend your $500,000, and you can't even tweak it a little bit at the end in order to try and help the results that you end up getting. So I think one of the really cool things about this is that when you share a pre-registration, people almost use it as like calling dibs on an idea. So if someone later does the same work, you can refer to the pre-registration that you, in theory, shared first, and can say, hey, I actually had this idea and I shared with everyone, so you should cite me or give me some kind of credit. I think you're right that this works perfect on a blockchain, where you can have like that time-stamped like proof of idea where anyone else can access all of these pre-registrations, and then I guess like mediate disputes. If someone took someone else's idea, you'd be able to point towards the original idea that was first shared in the public domain.
Perry, you got a question?
No, it's very interesting. I'm just wondering how this would work in practice, though. Like, like sometimes, papers are published on very minute differences. So, like, I can publish a paper that finds, a result, and then Carlos can publish a paper that finds some generalization of that result, a very slight generalization, published nonetheless. Would those projects still be funded, say, with this pre-registration idea?
Yeah, I think so. So I think the difference would be you describe how you wanted to be different than Carlos's study at the front end. And if you could attract funding for that difference, then you'd be able to get it, kind of like in a Kickstarter sense.
And I guess this would work really well with like medical studies, and where it's like, all right, we just need to like test this antibiotic and see if it has this effect, And I think it's pretty easy to specify what you're going to be doing and what's the result going to be. I imagine like if you're sort of, I don't know, playing with some like mathematical objects, it's hard to say like, what's my validation and what's going to happen, once I finish it. But I think definitely in those fields, it's probably in the more like applied sort of biomedical fields is where you really want this, because it's where you risk a lot of like loss, like I said, if someone just ends up taking that idea without telling you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in general that there's kind of like a difference between exploratory research and confirmatory research. I have a friend who does biomedical informatics, where basically he'll like just pick up old data sets that have already been created and do his own analysis to try and find orphan drugs or drugs that are used on one disease and could be used on another disease after they've already passed FDA approval. And so he's got some wild results where it's like, oh, you can use this weird chemotherapy drug to like treat bipolar disorder in theory, just because the molecular structure might fit the receptor. I made those examples up. That's not what it is at all. But like, it's like it makes connections that you would never think. So that's very valuable in like an exploratory sense. But then it's really necessary to have a confirmatory experiment to then actually test that relationship and see if you can find the results which were suggested in kind of the more global exploratory perspective. I think importantly too, funding via pre-registrations is sort of like a V1 of how we think we can help the scientific ecosystem in general by creating more of an incentive for pre-registrations. But I think the way that we go about funding projects will evolve over time to help include like everything, not just what would be best served through pre-registration.
I guess it might get kind of tricky if someone's like, all right, I pre-register the cure for cancer, and then it's like, well, now nobody can, work on. I mean, I'm sure there must be some kind of like even a review of a pre-registration or some kind of process like that, right? I don't know. Are there people already doing this kind of thing?
Yeah, so Open Science Framework is a great tool where it's basically like a place to upload files related to your research studies. It's fairly prevalent in fields like psychology, where it's a little bit of a softer science. A lot of people will do it. I also think that one of the nice parts about the way that we're going about it is if you have an idea for a research study, not only can you claim that specific idea, but you can also put it out into the world for feedback. So maybe you're using the wrong statistical technique to look at the data, or maybe it would be cool to like change your sample a little bit. Um, Through this method, you can put the paper or the pre-registration out there, solicit feedback from your community. In theory, the people providing feedback also earn tokens for doing so. And then before you actually conduct the study, you make it better. So hopefully making the experiment better.
But just to go back to Carlos's point, I don't think it. If I understand correctly, you couldn't just say like I'm going to cure cancer, and then whenever a cure for cancer comes out, they have to cite me. You have to like put in some sort of hypothesis of how you're going to cure this cancer, and all this stuff, right? That's how the registration would work.
Yeah, exactly. And like cancer in general, it's such a wide disease. It would be like, okay, so I want to treat neuroblastomas using like some stem cell type thing, where we're going to be looking at the like gene signature of this glioblastoma like cells. We're going to be looking at like MRI scans to see the size of the tumor. We're going to be looking at like this specific marker that's representative of the tumor in the blood. So it's not like necessarily like a domain name where you can say like icuredcancer.com, but like it's the methodology get pretty intense, and like there are a lot of really creative people who are thinking about experiments. So I think if you can devise an experiment that would prove a cure for cancer, just the methodology for it, and you can share it, I think you deserve the credit, at least from my perspective.
So it's basically a grant application that you make public for everyone to give information on or feedback on, basically, instead of just
exactly.
a specific private
And
entity.
like a abridged grant application, something you can get done in like 60 minutes rather than a huge, massive thing.
I guess maybe just before we move on, I was asking about like these pre-registrations and if there's some kind of like governance or some kind of staking mechanism that gets put in place that says, if you're going to try to cure cancer, maybe you need to like put something up front to prove that you're serious about it, or I'm wondering if like these kinds of mechanisms are things that people are looking at.
Yeah, definitely. So I think there are a lot of protections that we could build in on like the funder side. For instance, like hitting check marks in the study. Like if you're going to cure cancer, that's probably like a 5-10 year long huge research project. So having like the funds be tied to certain check marks where you receive more funding as you prove that you're using it effectively to conduct the experiment. I also the way I see this has an element of like Kickstarter, or have you ever seen Republic, like some of these startup funding websites?
No, just Kickstarter and GoFundMe. And yeah.
So there are a couple of websites out there where like people will try and do crowdfunding for companies, and they're much more likely to get their funding if they have some initial traction, like some cool advisors or some kind of like preliminary data to show success that the startup will work. So I could see it like if you put a pre-registration for a huge project without any like prior results showing that you have the ability to complete it, I could see that not being too interesting. Like, I wouldn't want to spend my money on it. But if it was someone who clearly could do the work, was already demonstrating some of the early steps of the project, then I think it's much more appealing to not just myself, but also big funders like Chen Zuckerberg or Gates Foundation, something like that.
Oh, okay. Maybe that brings me to another question. So do you see this like having appeal to the general audience, or it's kind of, I mean, I imagine they might not have enough knowledge to actually evaluate these proposals, just a person who's not in the field, or is it more, and also they might not be willing to give up that much money, right? Just the average person. So is it more sort of to make it easier for these big institutions to have like a streamlined method of funding research?
Yeah, so personally, I think both. I think what happens now a lot is people will have like a cause that they care about, whether it's like Alzheimer's research or breast cancer or something, and they'll give it $20 to like Susan G. Komen or like the Alzheimer's Foundation, and then that nonprofit will essentially redistribute it to funders. I think that we can help put people more in touch with the science. So if I want to give $20 to a breast cancer researcher, we can show them where their money would be best spent as curated by breast cancer researchers. So rather than relying on like a nonprofit's like granting committee to trust them to do, the hard work of finding what's worth funding, you can let the community sort of help curate those projects for you, and then either give like I think the example I always use is like, I really enjoy meditation. I think it has a lot of value when it comes to like mental health and psychiatry in general. So I don't have very much money. Like, I'm a medical student living on loans, but there are some researchers which I think are doing really interesting work that I think will impact my career down the road, and I would definitely give them $20. I don't know if that would matter at all. I don't know if there are enough of me out there to have that matter, but I think there are a lot of intelligent people out there who have a little extra money, who have, I guess, not like hobbies, but like are interested in learning in a more structured way about the world. So I could see both institutions and individuals wanting to use this.
Cool. No, I mean, okay. So then maybe we should have a look at what you've actually built, and maybe we'll keep discussing as we do that. How do you feel about that,
Yeah,
Patrick?
great.
Okay. Yeah. So maybe you can share your screen and show us around, and then I think the idea was for us to upload our own paper to Research Hub and then go from there. But if you want to give like a quick demo or tour, we can start with that.
Yeah, perfect.
Sweet. You should be allowed to share a screen, but if not, let me know. Nice. Okay.
So here's the app. The idea is like a Reddit style research forum. Sorry, I don't have my actual account signed in here, but you can have papers which are posted and then curated, and people can comment on these papers. So a good example of this, which I always like to show, is we held a journal club a few months back with Dr. Daniel Himmelstein discussing his paper called Sci-Hub Provides Access to Nearly All Scholarly Literature. So we basically held like a journal club about his paper, where anyone could show up online and he would respond to questions both in person and via the Research Hub forum. So we collected a bunch of questions about the paper, and he came in and actually answered them in real time for people. So the idea is we're trying to create this discussion around scientific papers in a way that researchers can actually openly ask questions about others' work, and then the average person can come in and learn a little bit more about this dialogue. So if you wanted to submit a paper, the way this works is you find something you're interested in. I'm a huge fan of bioRxiv. So I would go to bioRxiv, see a paper that I thought was interesting. Just looking through these
Look
now.
me up.
Yeah, we go with a widespread lateral gene transfer among grasses. I think that's a widely popular topic. So what you do is you take the URL, go to the add paper button, paste the URL, and we should be able to automatically find most papers that are posted in preprint servers or I guess uploaded in open access journals. It
Very
turns out,
cool.
yeah, this one actually, we've been scraping preprint servers. So this one's already been posted within Research Hub. So I would go to that paper, upvote it, and then add summaries. So if I had spent time like actually reading the paper, I could say, so grasses have widespread lateral gene transfer. And I can post like a bullet point type summary of the paper. So that way, when someone comes in, they can just quickly skim over what the paper is about. And then if they want to read more, check out the abstract. And then if they want to read even more, they can see the paper itself.
Do you have any like recommendation engine happening or is in the roadmap? Like if I want to see similar papers?
Absolutely. So there are actually a couple cool companies that do that now based on like citations. And one thing that I think we definitely have in mind is what we have now is this hubs page where you can subscribe to like specific fields of science. So if I'm interested in biochemistry, I can see all of the biochemistry papers that people are sharing. But I do think eventually having like something at the bottom of the paper, almost like PubMed, where it's like, oh, this is actually something very similar about the exact topic would be really cool. We don't have that yet though.
So I saw you upvoted this paper, right? Is there a way, like, are all upvotes created equally? Like, is your upvote equivalent to my upvote? Like, I have no idea about grasses, right? Is maybe you do, I don't know. But my question is your upvote the same as my upvote? Is it worth the same?
So in the current iteration, yes, it is. We plan on keeping track of users' academic expertise. So if you guys signed up, we'd basically ask you like, hey, where have you gone to school? Have you published papers? We use something called ORCID, which is this online researcher identifier, in order to like have like a unique identity for each researcher. And we plan to have weighted reputation in each hub. So Perry, if you like upvoted a physics paper, it would be worth more than me upvoting a physics paper. And have basically like tiers based on someone's real life academic expertise. But that's on the roadmap. We probably won't have that for a couple months.
And for the paper, like points, so the number of upvotes in the paper, I guess, is meant just to reflect like the amount of attention it's getting, not necessarily like something about its quality or sort of its impact, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's just purely upvotes right now, which I think is a good marker for like exposure. We plan to add peer review to it eventually, where people can not only upvote, but say like, oh, this paper is high quality because of the methodology or because of the results or, various aspects of it. But we would have something eventually where if people peer reviewed, like, I don't know if you guys saw this paper, but there was something about like recently how there's a black hole at the center of the Earth, and like kind of it's like this. I think somebody was trolling a journal, but some open access journal like published this paper that was just very ridiculous. And so if you look at its altmetric score, it has like a killer altmetric score because everyone in the world retweeted it because it was kind of funny. But clearly it's not a rigorous paper. So we would have some kind of mechanism where if there's a lot of upvotes, but it's poorly peer reviewed, then the rewards would be distributed to the peer reviewers and not necessarily the author or the submitter of the post.
I think there's like a similar issue even when people like fabricate data, their paper gets cited a bunch of times because people are saying how the data must be fabricated.
Yeah.
And it looks like the paper is amazing, but in reality, they're just getting cited because they cheated or whatever.
I think it's almost important to like have in the back of our minds, like okay, so citations are one way to measure quality, right? Or like a researcher's quality. And like maybe upvotes are another way. And like maybe upvotes like filtered by peer review metrics is another way. But like all of these systems are going to have unintended consequences that people can game. And I think the really important thing is to have the perspective of like we're trying to make we're trying to evolve a new system that over time will be able to kind of wrinkle out some of these like I guess unintended consequences. So not just be stuck in citations or stuck in upvotes or stuck in upvotes plus peer review. Maybe it turns out that like downloads are a really important thing, like PDF downloads or just clicks, or maybe like does this get used within blogs or something? Like we're very open-minded to what the best way to measure a paper's quality is, and I think it will likely change a lot over time with evidence that we gather from running research up.
Yeah, so I think if you're transparent, also like people can pick the metrics they want to use and then just use them, right? No one's forcing you to pick any metric. You can fund papers based on whatever metric you want.
Yeah, exactly.
So right now, the main thing that's implemented is this like paper discussing and upvoting mechanism, and I guess you're still looking at the pre-registration and funding side of things, right? Or is there anything in that direction yet?
Let me share a pre-registration. We funded our first one last week. So
Ooh,
let's see if I can pull this up. We should, yeah, it was last Wednesday, so it should be in the last week. But this
Hot off the press.
yeah, exactly.
Ozeki exclusive.
First time the world's seeing this. We haven't even put on our Twitter. But so the idea here is this is a psychology student who's conducting a replication of a paper that they wrote about a year ago. And so they did a pre-registration, which is like the goals, hypotheses, methods, um, exclusion criteria, procedure, a bunch of details about the study. And as a company, we funded it with 25,000 research coin. So anyone else now who's contributed like in the platform and has earned research coin would be able to support the project as well if they wanted
to. Just to be, this research coin, it's not equivalent. They can't use it for actual funding right now, right?
Yep.
Is there? It's just to be able to access the system and use the features of the system.
Yeah, exactly.
But
Cool.
obviously, it's going to get traded eventually, right?
I think technically we don't have an opinion about that, but it's possible.
But like, if it's going to be used for funding a study, obviously it has to get traded for like fiat, right? At some point.
Yeah, I think there are plenty of reasons why people would want to go to a market and buy it in order to fund projects. If people didn't want to do that, or if it wasn't available in a marketplace, another thing that we plan on doing is building in basically like a Stripe integration, where people could fund using US dollars if they want. And then a portion of the funding would also have research coin associated with it as like a reputation boost for the receiving scientist. But I think there are plenty of advantages to using research coin too.
Sorry, maybe you can just take us through also, since we're talking about the coin, through which part of this project is actually on the blockchain right now?
So we have a Aragon DAO where we can make decisions as a community. The research coins are used as like a representation mechanism within the DAO. So the more coins you have, the more you're able to influence questions that are put before the DAO. The coin itself is an ERC20 on the Ethereum mainnet, but almost everything else is more of a traditional company. The database currently is an Amazon S3, like web bucket. And all of the like front end and everything is done in a centralized server, but the coin itself is on Ethereum.
Do you guys plan to move to a more decentralized version eventually, or is this like the way you want to proceed for the future versions as well?
So the thought process on having everything centralized initially outside of the token is that you can iterate quickly. So one of the issues with doing everything on smart contracts is that they're very difficult to write properly. And for instance, if we received feedback from you guys that you want reputation tied into the outputs, it would be harder for us to make that change than the way it's currently set up. So if we wanted to respond quickly to feedback, we can do that now. And I think likely what will happen is we'll reach a certain point where we think we have our product market fit, and the community is growing with the current utility. And I anticipate the community would want to have a lot of it more decentralized. But I think it's advantageous to remain nimble until we're at that point. So in my perspective, I think it makes a lot of sense, but I'm not entirely sure the timeline on when that would happen.
Yeah, cool. That makes sense. Carlos, I don't know if you have.
That makes a lot of sense. From what we've experienced with smart contracts, they can be quite not user friendly, not developer friendly yet. So that's probably a smart choice for now. But I mean, for sure, it's going to bring a lot of value, right? If you want to guarantee some sort of transparency and finality in these things, I guess it's going to be like a pretty important differentiator from a lot of other solutions, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I even think like the value proposition of having all of the commentary around scientific research in a decentralized database where anyone can have access to it, I think is incredibly powerful. And there's no centralized I guess custodian to like have to trust in order to have that data available for everyone. To me, I think there's a huge value down the road of having all of that stored in a decentralized manner. I think another really important thing is making sure that the incentives are set up using evidence. And so being able to get to the point where our incentives are working well enough to scale to this kind of larger goal of housing a lot of science, staying centralized until then, and then making changes once it becomes apparent it's more valuable.
Are you doing things like timestamping though these pre-registrations say on the blockchain yet, or is that still in the future?
That's
Or
still
for the future?
We could do it on IPFS pretty easily, but we don't have that implemented currently.
I see. Cool.
Guys, I just submitted a paper.
Nice.
Very nice. Here we go.
This is one you guys authored too, right?
Yeah.
This is our paper, yeah.
Very cool.
So now people can upvote it and add in takeaways, right? But you said like the author has some special sort of status
Yeah,
here?
you guys, it seems that there's no author currently. You can go into the edit paper and add yourself. So I can show here on mine once I sign in. I'm in Brave, so it might be giving me some trouble. Let me see.
No. We commend you. If you have to manually type in Perry's last name, though, we're going to need a whole other episode for that.
It's right there, right? This is it.
Right here.
Oh, yeah, it's there.
Cool. Yeah. So it actually had you guys as the authors.
Oh, but it didn't go into the author field?
Yeah, for some reason, if you click edit the paper, you can say I'm the author here, and then
Oh, I see.
so that way you can have
Oh, wow.
like the specific name tag.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I'll do that. I'll do that once we finish. Cool. Well, I think that's very nice. And right now, are there tokens attached to the paper themselves, to the papers themselves yet, or is that as well for the future?
I think in like an NFT type situation.
Not sure what that is.
Non-fungible tokens.
Oh, I guess. I mean, right now I guess I'm still not super clear on what the use of the token is. Is it really only like to donate funds for someone to carry out some research?
So another thing the token does now is you can increase the visibility on a piece of research. So if I have, this is not my primary account, so I don't have any on it, but if I had my primary account, I'd be able to add upvotes to a paper. So
Oh, I see.
if it has 8, I could add 10, confirm it, and then it would have 18 for a certain period of time, where you can increase the exposure of your own work, or like a scientist where you're like, oh, hey, this person's doing great work and they need more recognition. And it just adds upvotes to allow for more visibility in the feed.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And how do you get tokens to begin with?
For contributing content. So by submitting papers, adding comments to papers, being the authors of papers. We have a couple more mechanisms that will be built in soon, but the idea is for contributing content only, you earn tokens.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is something we discussed, Perry. Like it's kind of tricky to attach tokens to reputation because unless you limit like their movement, you don't want to necessarily just like give someone reputation for not doing anything. So yeah, I guess I'm wondering like uh, to what extent the tokens are sort of frozen to a specific person, or if they're transferable or things like that.
Yeah, so they're transferable, but the way we consider reputation is basically lifetime earned tokens. So if you earn the tokens, your reputation only goes up, but then you can transfer earned tokens out afterwards.
That makes sense. Yeah.
But okay, so the lifetime tokens don't include the tokens you've bought, right? Or it's just the tokens that have been accumulated by contributing.
Yep, or given for signing up with a PhD, some
I see.
in a field, so that way we can like say, oh, hey, like Perry's already a PhD in physics, he should have some kind of increased reputation in that hub.
I see. And is there? Do you have an idea of how you're gonna count the reputation now?
So right now it's just one reputation point increase for every coin you earn, but
Okay.
I think that will probably get a lot more complex and nuanced.
Yeah, so that's a problem we've thought about a lot, and we've already discussed this. But yeah, I'm curious to see what you guys are gonna come up with.
That's a really hard problem.
Yeah.
I think we'll probably need lots of help in order to get it right.
I mean, I guess in a certain manner, if you have the infrastructure in place, like you said, you can decide if you care about citations or if you care about upvotes or all this stuff. And if you just have sort of this, uh, way of transferring funds and reputation, then maybe you let the community decide, where they want to place their value. Because I kind of uh, find it really hard, especially if you're working on with smart contracts and things like that, to have sort of like, this is our set of rules that's going to say how reputable a person is, and that's never going to change, and it's going to capture all cases. So I find it's like, I guess it's a hard problem, and maybe one that doesn't ever have like one specific solution.
Yeah, I agree. And even like if you look at like what metrics would define a prestigious researcher in neuroscience versus like ecology, like it's pretty different. And so one thing that we feel strongly about is basically like turning over governance of each hub to researchers in that field. So like we've had a couple people take an interest in the psychology hub. And so basically they're thinking about like psychology specific changes that would happen within the website in order to help like facilitate their use case. So allowing people who are already in their fields to decide like how they want reputation to be distributed within specific fields, I think is pretty important.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. The physics community versus psychology must have different rules of what qualifies as a good paper or a bad paper, right? Yeah, so that makes sense.
Have you noticed like non people that aren't in the scientific community participating in this ecosystem a lot?
Yeah, so it's probably like 50-50 right now. Like 50% people posting papers from their field, either that they authored or that they're fans of, and then like answering questions about it. And then 50% just totally random people who happen to have an interest in science and will post. I think just the current global like pandemic climate has turned everybody into an armchair, epidemiologist. So lots of people have lots of opinions. But yeah, I think I'd say it's about 50-50. And one of the things that we hope to do is kind of like create this financial incentive for non-academics to learn about science. So yeah, I like it having not everyone be necessarily like discussing within their own field.
Yeah, that's definitely pretty interesting. And I guess one of the things that I find most annoying about the current status of the academic sort of publishing cycle is like the peer review. Are you able to comment on what kinds of plans you have for that aspect, and if it's ever something you guys want to touch on? And I think you mentioned it earlier, but maybe we can discuss it a bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. If you don't mind, though, I'm curious, like what you find frustrating about the current setup, and then that might be a good way to jump off of what we're kind of thinking about.
I mean, I think there's a few things. One obviously is there's a very strong trade-off between speed and quality. So in computer science, at least, you often send your paper to a conference and it gets reviewed in a month. And these conferences get thousands of papers, and the reviewers probably give you like 2-3 sentences reviews, and that's not very good. And the other thing is, if a paper does get accepted and uh, it only means that about 3 people found it to be somewhat decent after like reading it once. We don't know to what degree of attention, and sort of when you say, okay, this is a peer-reviewed piece of work, what it really means is 3 random people kind of thought it was okay. Obviously different journals have like different levels of I guess demands, but at the end of the day, it still feels like it's a very sort of stochastic process, and there's like a lot of finality behind it. You know what I mean? Like once the paper is accepted, it's accepted, and it's kind of locked in forever, which I find kind of weird. I think Perry's come across papers, and I have too, that you look closer at it and it looks like it's complete crap, right? And obviously maybe you can't expect 3 reviewers to have noticed everything about it. So that's why we'd been thinking about something more continuous and open to the public. And I'm wondering if you guys are looking in that direction as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the one thing that is frustrating about like even the term peer review or peer reviewed paper is that it almost gives like a paper like this bulletproof, like science approved check mark, where then the general public can take it and like, do whatever they want with that information. The paper I mentioned earlier about there being a black hole at the center of the Earth, that was peer reviewed somehow. But like it was, it technically qualifies as like peer-reviewed research, and the entire community was like, this is probably not very good. So it was a low quality peer-reviewed research. But yeah, I think it's really unhealthy to like basically like trust anonymous people behind a black box where you can't even see their feedback, that like just because these 3 anonymous people said yes, this is good, then it is good. I think there's a lot of things wrong with peer review. Um, the first being that anyone should be able to review a paper. Like even post-publication reviews, I think are helpful. I don't know if you guys have seen PubPeer, but it's a website where people will like if they have an opinion on a paper, they'll go and basically like share like an unsolicited peer review of a paper. And it's pretty cool because it's like a lot of like research fraud and stuff where it's like sort of controversial, and people will just out of like charity and almost like interest of their field share their opinions. I think one of the issues with this is it's not very sustainable, that you basically rely on people with free time who have the expertise to do this. I think one of the big things that we're trying to bring to the table is like compensating people for doing peer review. So it's not just 3 volunteers in a black box, but it's anyone in the world who wants to share their opinion of the paper. And then it's basically the rewards for that review are distributed based on how valuable people in the field found the review. So rather than just 3 random people, anyone can share it. And I think that will allow for a much more, I guess, complete valuation of findings within papers.
We also played with the idea of like a dynamic review. So like it could be you can have a positive review the day the paper comes out. But, as time goes on, maybe people find out that maybe what you did was not actually, like, as the problem gets more and more understood, maybe the methodology wasn't the best, or maybe the results weren't as clear. And you can change the paper from being a good paper to a bad paper as time goes on. I don't know if you guys have thought about that also.
I love that idea. I think it makes a lot of sense too. Just one example, and this kind of brings in the current peer review ecosystem. But I was speaking with someone a couple weeks ago about our pre-registration idea, and just talking about peer review in general. And he said within his field, like he had different ideas about certain theories than some of the like top scientists in his field, but he had to almost like he knew that his audience in peer review for the journals that he would be applying to would be the top scientists. So he'd tailor his language in order to be congruent with their theories, even though he didn't believe in them, because he knew that he would automatically get rejected if he didn't. And so having it be able to be put in the open, where this person can phrase their paper in any way they want and receive criticism from the field as a whole, rather than necessarily like these gatekeepers at the top. I think it'll change the way that science is published as well, because it allows people to be a little bit more free with how they're sharing ideas.
Yeah, I agree. And I think there's maybe like some conflation on or some confusion on what it means for a paper to be accepted. Like I guess there's a component of like methodology and soundness of the research, just in terms of like, there's no biases, everything was done correctly. And there's also the aspect of like impact. And reviewers kind of have that double job of deciding whether a paper is impactful and whether it's methodologically sound. And I'm imagining it happens a lot that sometimes the methodological soundness gets a bit sacrificed for the impact, but they let it in because the journal gets some prestige. So maybe like the point of maybe the next evolution of peer review is we just care about something being truthful and methodologically sound. And then you let the community do these like upvoting steps, where, okay, like this is the paper that went up to the top, not because it got published in Nature or got published in this journal, but because people actually just directly found it useful,
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I even think it's kind of silly how like they judge impact in the moment, when important research, it might not be until 10 years down the road where they're like, whoa, like this is a great idea, but the publishing researcher won't necessarily get that reward. Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's the whole concept of journals gatekeeping, like the
Yeah.
important, like where people's attention is deserved, is really, really antiquated to me.
So do you see Research Hub as like sort of a one mega journal type of place, which gets rid of the notion of like you don't care what the paper's about, but you look at where it was published and that's how you deem it interesting? Or is it kind of working together with the peer review systems of the individual journals and then sort of like being some kind of aggregator on top of that?
Yeah, so I think what the second choice you described, like an overlay journal, I think it's really important to us in general to work with people who are in the space. I think science is best when it's collaborative, and so it makes sense for us to try and like collaborate as much as we can with some of the people who are fulfilling some of these functions currently. Um, so a good example of this is like a preprint server versus like eLife, for instance, which is a journal I really enjoy. A preprint server, anyone can go and share like a preprint. It doesn't necessarily have to be like from Harvard or anything like that. And then these preprints are eventually submitted to journals where they're then peer reviewed behind closed doors and published with the regular articles. I think that we could help provide some crowdsourced peer review for preprints in order to, I think, help improve them, and then inform journals of like, hey, like this is a cool paper that people are paying attention to. And then also provide some like post-publication review for papers that like are published in eLife, and then people still have opinions about them that they want to share. It can be like a congregating place for researchers to see others' opinions about a paper.
Another thing that I found quite frustrating is that, like, I've had the experience where, you submit a paper to a journal, you have to like really overfit it to that journal's style, and you have to like, change the figures, change the writing, and then, they reject your paper, and then you have to go to another journal, spend a few months like completely, I mean, the information is still the same, but just because it's another journal and they have specific tastes, you have to completely like rewrite what you did. And to me, like, that's such a waste of time. So like the idea of having just like a universal repository of papers, but that's really nicely filtered in terms of quality and, experts opinions on each paper, and in terms of impact, it just seems like a much cleaner way of doing things, right? You write what you did, you write what you found, and then that's it. No like I don't know, putting makeup on your paper for months and then redoing it after they don't like it. I don't know if I guess you mentioned that as like a layer on top of the preprint servers. Is that kind of the direction you're going towards?
Yeah, I think so. And I'm actually really glad you mentioned that, because sometimes it like just stupefies me how we like assign our resources within science, where like, you're an extremely well-trained biologist. Like, you're not a typesetter, like the amount of time you have to spend learning like latex to be able to actually do this is, I mean, there's a lot of science that you could be doing with that time. And I think kind of even on top of that, like, this is a little bit off tangent, but like with the whole research grant infrastructure, like we take this, okay, so 1% of scientists or first year PhD students end up being like academic professors, right? And like even a smaller percentage of them end up having labs where they keep getting recurring grants and get to the point where they have tenure. So we have this like grueling gulag of like a economy in order to get the best scientists to the top. And if you win that game, you're supposed to stop doing science and become a manager and a salesman. So it's like we groom people and we train people for a role that completely changes as soon as they get to the top of their field. And I think that is just, it's like a massive waste of human resources that could be recouped pretty easily.
There's also like this prestige in like getting published in these like higher end journals. So like you try to publish in Nature, even though you probably won't get published, and then you spend your time, formatting like Carlos was mentioning. Then you go to a notch below, and then you format, and then you go to a notch below until you fit in where you're supposed to fit. Instead of like, I guess what Research Hub is trying to do is you publish your paper, and you let people decide how important or unimportant it is.
And you
Instead
have
of
to
some
fit
editor
you have to fit your paper into one page at Nature.
yeah, it's like I don't want to, but I have to because I want to publish in Nature.
And the editors tell you to lose certain results. They say, hey, we don't need this in our paper. Like, absolutely. No, I totally agree that having more freedom to share information, how the authors choose to, is pretty important.
Yeah, I think it is definitely time for something like this. And I don't know, I mean, in my lab, we spend so much time deciding where we're going to submit something, when like we got the results, people who know how to use them will be able to get that information wherever we publish. Nobody's like, signing up for these journals, by mail and like waiting for the magazine to come, and reading only those papers. Yeah. I just go on Google Scholar, I type in like some terms, and that's what I get, right? It doesn't matter which journal it came from. So that I find crazy. And especially now, like, I mean, I read a lot of machine learning papers, and a lot of times they're already like citing each other before they've been peer reviewed. Things are moving so quickly that no one's going to want to spend 3 months going through a peer review process to get the feedback of 3 people. So, I mean, I think you're hitting on a very important pain point here.
especially if the peer review process rejects your paper because it's 2 pages instead of 1, right? And then you got to go 3 more months to submit it somewhere else.
I think like the average time from submission to publication, or like even acceptance to publication, is like 8 months for chemistry journals or something. And it's similar with biology. And even like it's funny because I was reading like with the COVID stuff, a lot of the papers now have gotten to the point where they're peer reviewed, when in the first couple of months it was all preprints because there wasn't enough time for peer review. And so I saw a study about like the different strains, and it was using, like, it was published in late July, early August, and it was using information from like late April, because that's when the authors submitted it to the journal. So it didn't even get shared until like 4 months later. And at that point, like there were another like 8 strains out there. So it's like totally irrelevant. And I was just like, this is, I mean, it just highlights how like when something's moving fast, it's moving fast, you know, and it's, I think the community can keep up, but the infrastructure with journals can't.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I guess, when did you start Research Hub? Maybe we should have asked that first.
Yeah, so I've been collaborating with the team for just about a year now, a little less than a year. We've had like an app ready for 6 months or so.
So it was like the most timely thing possible, right? Like as soon as the pandemic comes out, papers are pouring out. This is definitely something that, like, I guess you must have been, well, not happy about, but probably like glad you could, do something useful for this.
It's good that these problems are brought to the attention of the general public, because I even think now people are like non-scientists are like talking about peer review, right, and like what value that brings. I know, so I'm interested in psychiatry, as I mentioned earlier, and like a lot of the frontline therapeutics used are like, the evidence to support them isn't that great, you know? And like, it's pretty obvious to me that peer review doesn't totally fulfill this like bulletproof type, I think, aura that it's given to papers. And to me, I think the value of the pandemic is kind of bringing like these flaws in science to like the average person. So they're like, whoa, like maybe this isn't like some kind of like super, you know, superhuman peer reviewer who has approved the science to be knowledge now.
Yeah, go for it, Perry.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, it seems like once you get published, what you did was fact. You know, like that's the fact. Before it was like, we don't know. Then someone says yes, and it's like, yeah, now this is part of the canon of literature, of scientific literature. From one second to the next, I don't know.
The thing that's
And
crazy too is it's like 50% plus can't be replicated. So you got to figure at least half of studies probably shouldn't be, you know, etched in stone anyway. And like when a retraction does happen, like when there's enough of an upswell from scientists saying, hey, this paper doesn't look quite right, most journals barely even acknowledge it. Like they might pull the paper, but it's hard to have people unlearn from a retracted paper. Even letting them know the paper was retracted is hard, you know. But yeah, it's just a really challenging thing.
have you seen, I just saw this like feature that's being tested on Archive, which like, it's like you upload the paper and you also upload code, which is supposed to like replicate your results. And then there's some kind of like GitHub setup there where, like, people can try to replicate that study. I mean, maybe that's something you guys can look into, eh?
Yeah, so that's with papers with code. If anybody's listening, you should check this out. That website
Yeah,
is
yeah.
awesome.
No, but I think, wait, oh, they're doing it together with Archive now?
I think so. I think
Oh,
that's
okay.
like a partnership that they're like bringing the code portion into the archive papers.
That's great. Yeah.
But yeah, I think all of the supplementary materials we'd love to have like in one place. So if people wanted to like cite extra data in a criticism of the paper or the code itself, they'd be able to do that.
The other thing I found is that a lot of papers get published that don't share all their data, which I find extremely shocking. Often it's because they're like they're doing some like, drug screening, and they don't want to share their library, and they don't tell you exactly what compounds they discovered, and, they get published in top journals, and it's pretty weird. That's definitely anti-scientific.
It's very weird. And I think the demand from scientists are changing to where people will expect to see code, and ideally like would question the findings of the papers if they didn't include all their data and code associated with it.
Yeah, hope so. Well, I mean, this sounds great. I think maybe we should start wrapping up. Perry, do you have any questions?
Maybe Patrick can take us through what you see in the immediate future, or maybe more down the road for Research Hub. Like, what's the timeline and what's the roadmap, maybe?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're currently building out the ability to fund different research projects, which should be completed within the next month or so. And then I think the next major addition, which I'm really excited about, is we want to build in an electronic lab notebook. So, like a Jupyter notebook style tool where researchers could not necessarily just share manuscripts of papers, but they'd be able to share like every research output along the entire like journey of making a paper. So you could share like data for individual experiments, methods, code, like we said earlier.
As they're doing these things.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, in real time. And I think one of the hooks we have for funders, which we'd like to do eventually, is if you support someone on Patreon, you get early access to their content, right? So we could do something where if you funded a scientist, you get early access to their electronic lab notebook, and you'd be able to see the project like come together in real time and add commentary to it in order to partake in some of the findings.
That's really cool. I guess it's going to take some like rewiring of the scientific community to like accept this mode of working. But I think if the fields want to stay relevant, they're going to have to do something like this, right?
Yeah, so that's a question that I have for you guys is the rewiring, right? I think one of the assumptions that we have is kind of how we started this interview is that the job market is just intensely competitive, and it's competitive to the point that it's not productive to be so competitive. So our assumption is that a financial incentive would help greatly to rewire some of these behaviors. Where if all of a sudden, rather than paying to publish, you get paid to publish, and rather than volunteering your time for peer review, you're compensated for doing so in a way that also helps build your resume. So I guess I'm curious if you guys think a financial incentive would help to encourage some of these behaviors.
Yeah. I mean, for sure. I guess like, you know, the dream is to like be able to research what you're interested in and get paid to do it, right? And you know, not maybe even not necessarily be attached to a university and have like a professorship, and you know, that's kind of, if you love to do research and you're not one of that, you know, 0.5% of people that are able to get these positions, you know, maybe you end up being a data scientist, or you know, something that maybe you wouldn't be your first choice. But if you have good ideas and if you know how to execute, and you know, the community is interested, I don't see why you should be like barred from the community, right? um, so that to me is like a really interesting alternative.
You guys are great examples, right? Like a biology PhD and a physics PhD who are published in a peer-reviewed blockchain journal. You know, like I think lots of people have wide varieties of interests that they'd be able to contribute to academic literature on.
Yeah, for sure. And it's stuff, yeah, I mean, if you're into it, you're willing to do it for free, and obviously if there's money there, you can even find time to not do the other things you had to do in order to move on that, right? I guess I really hope that people like people get behind this kind of thing. I don't know like how much resistance there is in sort of the old academic machine and the grant funding agencies and all that, but I guess the trend has always has been that sort of this like democratization of things has worked pretty nicely. um I hope that like you know, the fact that it's tech usually like such uh the research that's being conducted is usually so technically involved that a very small percentage of the population can actually like participate. But I guess you guys have thought about that, right? Like with the this sort of like condensing of results and getting rid of jargon and all that might get people to engage, and then be able to sort of fuel the rest of the cycle, right? So it's definitely very cool.
Or if they're interested enough, they can take the time to learn, like to learn the technical jargon, right?
Yeah, for sure.
It's a matter of like, if you're interested enough, why not? Like, why not be able to participate?
And I think it's getting to that point, right, where science is becoming like impactful in everyday lives more than it did before, I would imagine. Like, you know, at least I pay attention a lot to the AI stuff, and there's even like not much of a distinction between, you know, the research that companies do and the research that universities do, right? So it's like it's going to start affecting people's lives so much that there's going to be a much bigger audience than, you know, when people were like discovering the atom or something and no one knew how that would help. You know?
Yeah, totally. And I even think like what Perry said is like our ideal world is in 5 years, like you can make a couple bucks an hour trying to learn how to, you know, be good at nuclear physics. So have some kind of like subsidized education where everyone in the world has an incentive to try and, I think, become scientifically literate in whatever field they're interested in.
I guess the model is GitHub, right? That maybe you guys are going after. We didn't mention that, but obviously that's super successful. And
I mean, it's research.
Yeah.
There's a hub in the name, right?
right. Well, a lot of hubs, right? um, yeah. So I mean, we didn't mention that, but obviously that's what you guys were thinking of, right?
Yeah, I think so. The anecdote that I like here is when I first started working on this project, like, you know, I'm not a developer by any sense. Like I did a PhD or started a PhD, got a master's, med school. But like, it's hard to find developers to work with when you don't have any money. So I learned like the very basics of Ruby on Rails while I found like a co-founder. So I was able through GitHub, just like blogs and open source code repositories, to teach myself enough to sort of be able to get away or get around like a open source Reddit type forum. And thank God I didn't actually have to use it, but I was able to. And if I wanted to dedicate 2 or 3 years to doing that, like I could, and I think eventually make a career out of it. So we want to bring that type of like job marketplace where anyone can learn, demonstrate their value, and then have a career in a field to science.
I guess the biggest point of resistance is going to be the fields where there's lots of overhead to actually doing something, right? If you need $1 million lab to get a result, I mean, I wonder, like, how do you guys consider that type of market and how it sort of works with this like democratic sort of crowd sourcing model?
Yeah, so I think that's a super important point. I think one of the things that we can facilitate is like the recycling of data. So, like the Human Genome Project, right, is this like bajillion-dollar endeavor that took a decade plus to do, but the data is openly available. So anyone can go out, learn bioinformatics tools, and then like glean that data for new findings. And so I think kind of two perspectives here are over time, you'd be able to demonstrate that you're high enough quality to, you know, be worthy of receiving the funding required to have a big lab. And then two, I think we can connect the people who have the ideas for experiments with funders. So this is a much further down the road iteration, but we could have someone propose methodology for an experiment via pre-registration, and then someone who can actually conduct that experiment could step in and say, hey, you know, I'll do this, I'll collect this data for X portion of the rewards that come out of it. So I think helping to make connections is another way that we can like let anyone in the world get into like a MIT laboratory in order to learn about the world.
Nice, very nice. Well, I guess we could keep going for a while, but we're gonna hit, I think, almost 2 hours, well, an hour and a half. So Perry, do you have any questions? If not, maybe we can let Patrick have like the last say.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Thanks, Patrick. Maybe you can take us out.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you guys for having me. I think I've spoken with these guys a couple times now, and it's been a blast. I love learning about the experience. Yeah, I think we covered a lot of what we're hoping to accomplish with Research Hub. We're just getting things off the ground now where our community is building. So if anybody's listening to this, you know, we'd really appreciate it if you log in, submit a paper, and try and start a conversation. Also, we're starting to build like community representatives. So there are people who are like interested in, maybe they run an open science journal club or something at their university, and they have friends that would be interested in Research Hub. we're giving out research coin grants to people who are interested in helping to build a community around their actual academic workplace. So feel free to send us a message. My email is pat@researchhub.com, or join our community Slack, and you can find us there in order to get in touch and see if we can find a way to help each other out.
Excellent. I'll put those links in the description, of course. Yeah, that sounds really great. Well, Pat, I want to say thank you so much for joining us. It's really very, very cool chat. And
Yeah, thanks so much, and good luck with Research Hub.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Thanks for having me, and looking forward to talking about your paper.
Yeah, that's
Absolutely.
it. We just live made a submission, so we're gonna hopefully get people interested in that. Get some upvotes going.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks. I had a blast.
See you later,
Thanks, Pat.
Patrick. Thank you.
Take care. Bye.